and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I am your host now for nearly 7 years and just shy of 500 podcast conversations where every Tuesday and Friday I have the enormous privilege, as extended to me by the Franklin Covey Company, the sponsor of this podcast, to interview and converse with some of the world's most remarkable people. Sometimes they show up as formal leaders, experts, academics, researchers, scientists. Sometimes they are entrepreneurs, founders, Fortune 50 leaders. Sometimes they've written books and sometimes they have not. What they all have in common is their desire to pour into you, to become a better leader, a better parent, a better human. Franklin Covey, of course, is the world's most trusted leadership firm, founded in part over 4 decades ago by the author Stephen Covey, who, of course, amongst many books, wrote the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, sometimes on this podcast, we don't have experts that set out to be experts. They were foisted, pulled, drowned in a traumatic scenario. We have had people that have boarded commercial aircrafts and crashed and were one of 1 or 2 people who survived it and walked away to tell about it. We've had people that have had horrific things happen in their lives and have summoned the courage and the vulnerability to not just survive the horror, but to teach through it. Today is one such guest. Now, she is a very acclaimed artist, singer, dancer, actor. You likely have seen her on stage, perhaps on television, in commercials. Hails from Park City, Utah, and is here today to talk about her book that is titled The Commodity of Connection: How Authentic Relationships Saved My Life When My Daughter Lost Hers. Get ready for a very vulnerable, emotional conversation with our guest today, Molly Bice Jackson. Molly, welcome to On Leadership.
Hi, Scott. It's so great to be here.
It is an honor to be featuring your story, your work, your struggle, your survival. I know much of your story because you are a fairly acclaimed, I say fairly, you are an acclaimed performer, actor, teacher, coach. Anybody in Utah or the Mountain West knows who you are because you've been on many stages and lots of commercials and certainly a lot on social media. I have learned of your story, the tragedy of your young daughter's death, because no one in Utah could not have missed that story many years ago when that happened. And today you're going to talk about that because your book, although titled The Commodity of Connection, has one of the best taglines I've had the privilege of reading, which is How Authentic Relationships Saved My Life When My Daughter Lost Hers. Now, you are an expert on helping people build connection. You are an expert communicator. It just so happens along the way, your family suffered an unspeakable tragedy we're going to talk about today, because you've given me permission to, and you've also written about it extensively in your book. Before we go to that, I want to just warn, advise, prepare all of our listeners and viewers that this interview today is going to be a special one. They're not all special. They're all unique. This one is very special because we have a leader, an entrepreneur, an author, a mother who has a story that is unfathomable. That's unspeakable, and she's going to teach through it today. I hope that you will pick up a copy of her book, The Commodity of Connection. You will laugh, you will cry, you will put it down. There's no way you can finish it in one sitting because I didn't. In fact, I had to put the book down midway through your daughter's hospitalization because I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take it. I could not finish your book. I stopped because of the weight and all the messages that you were teaching through it. Molly, welcome. Would you remind all of our guests and listeners who you are, where your passions and talents are, and why you came to write this book, and then we will dive deep.
I'd love to. I don't know if you stopping my book is a compliment or not. Hopefully it was powerfully written, but I know it's a lot to ask someone to hold. But I guess that's what I'm asking all of humanity in some capacity. I'm Molly Bice Jackson. I have lived in Park City, Utah for 20 years. I always thought I'd live in New York City. I live in Park City, and that's okay. I love the mountains. My background is in performing. I have a degree in music, dance, theater. A triple threat is what I have been told I am or should be. I love performing. I suppose that is where my background in vulnerability, authenticity stems from. I was truly trained to be vulnerable because you have to be to connect with your fellow performers on stage, to connect with the material, the audience. And I've always enjoyed and been comfortable being exactly who I am. And although my dreams were very much of Broadway, I have many friends on Broadway as we speak, I was able to pivot and use my gifts of performing and being on stage and communicating and my love of words after my daughter passed away. And I suppose my keynote speeches now are a version of a one-woman show. And I have been able to blend my humor. I always wanted to be on Saturday Night Live with my tragic story and somehow bring a fullness of who I am to every presentation that I give and leave people with something powerful, yes, painful, but also memorable that they can incorporate into their lives and their businesses. So,
Molly, you could have spoken and did speak and coach and teach a lot in your field of expertise, and still do and could and will. And then something unspeakable happened to your family. You write about it in quite prescriptive detail. I'd heard the story through several people in Park City that were mutual friends of ours and didn't have all the facts. It's remarkable, however, though, how you tell the story was actually quite similar to how I had heard it prior to you and I, meeting here in Utah some time ago. I'm going to invite you now. By the way, I could not finish the book because I was too traumatized. The book is insanely well written. It is beautiful. It is riotously funny. I actually texted you multiple lines out of the book that were hysterical, which you haven't responded yet because of your fame. You're on Broadway. You're just on metaphorical Broadway. The book is a gift to the reader because it could leave the reader feeling heavy and depressed and dark. Your book is respectful. It is beautiful. It is at parts riotously funny. It is well written. Congratulations. I'm going to think the first of many books you may write because you are a quadruple threat, including their author. If you would rewind and walk our audience through the tragedy that beset your daughter and your family, and then I have a litany of questions to tease out of it, all aligned with the commodity of connection.
So it was a beautiful spring day in Park City. We were just crawling our way out of an intense winter. It was 2008, and my firstborn daughter, Lucy, my only child at the time, was 2 weeks shy of her second birthday. And I had just finished playing the role of Peter Pan at the iconic Egyptian theater here on Main Street. I got to fly across the stage and finally use my gymnastics skills. I'm only 5'1". I'm just a rough and tumble amateur gymnast, kind of a tomboy. And it was such a beautiful poetic role in my life for many reasons and in many ways. And Lucy loved coming to the show and watching her mommy fly across the stage. And she was truly obsessed with all things Peter Pan. And she got to spend time backstage. The cast knew her. She would come to the show dressed as Tinkerbell. And I got to do that role for a good 3 or 4 months. It was one of the most successful shows that the Egyptian Theater had ever done. Sadly, they are no longer a professional equity theater house, but the show closed and I was busy planning Lucy's second birthday. And on that spring day in 2008, I packed her up and got her to church. And I was so proud of myself because I had actually made it on time and had a bag full of diapers and toys and snacks. And we sat in the meeting, and she was extremely restless that day. We had actually been up late the night before at a friend's wedding. So I suppose she was tired. She was disrupting the meeting like you would not believe. And I had to take her out. It was a little embarrassing, but like I mentioned, I've always been okay being who I am, and we're all human. But I took her out to the foyer. I tried to distract her, I tried to console her, and nothing was working. So eventually I decided we just have to leave. It was truly, as I mentioned in my book, the great tantrum of 2008 that may have been written about in history books. It was epic. And so I get her out to the car and I buckle her in her car seat. And I sit in the driver's seat and think she's exhausted. She might be hungry. I had tried giving her some animal crackers earlier and she did not want them. But at this point, I turned back and I handed her a Tupperware full of thinly sliced apples that I'd prepared that morning. And just when I went to turn the key in the ignition, I could hear her choking. And I could tell it was not just something slightly caught in her throat. It was a true choking. And as you know, with three boys, sometimes after young kids cry really hard, they're in that recovery phase where they're kind of grasping and catching air. And perhaps that's what she was doing when it aspirated this apple piece. So I raced out of the driver's seat. I unbuckled her from her car seat and I yelled for my husband, who was across the parking lot. And he raced toward us. He was very calm. He was confident. He thought, kids choke all the time. It will be okay. How could it not be? And he took her from me and he began doing the Heimlich maneuver. And she had these big blueberry eyes that locked with mine. And there was a look of sheer panic that just washed over her face. And as effectively as he was doing the Heimlich maneuver, it was not dislodging. He raced next door. There happened to be a fire station right next door to our church building. He raced next door and began pounding on the door. Unfortunately, it was locked. The firemen were out grocery shopping. I don't think the emergency often comes to them. I think they're used to going to the emergency. But Scott, that's when I tell you the panic that filled my every being, my soul, was all consuming. I laid on the ground and went into shock and began losing feeling in my limbs. Someone called 911. A green Subaru pulled into the parking lot. You know, it was chaos, of course. I was told many details later, but people began rushing out of the church building. Eventually, a life flight helicopter landed. They had tried doing a trach, asking if anyone had a pocket knife. The head of Summit County Search and Rescue happened to be in the church building. They were doing CPR, but they whisked my daughter away. And it was as if, you know, I was flying across that stage as Peter Pan, and it was as if the tech director just cut that rope and I just fell to the stage floor. And we raced down Parley's Canyon to Primary Children's and spent 4 very grueling and very sacred days while Lucy was on life support. And her brain damage was too severe. She had gone without oxygen, they estimated, for about 21, 22 minutes. And while they were able to go in and remove that small apple piece from one of her lungs, it was time to say goodbye. And her liver went to a 6-month-old baby girl. and her kidneys went to a 35-year-old father with 4 children. And we drove home to an empty house. And, the miracle we wanted, that she would bounce back. She was so vivacious and feisty like her mom. That obviously did not happen, but it's a miracle because I actually have felt joy again and have felt a depth of love and awareness that I otherwise would never have experienced. So thus began my journey of trying to blog my way through my grief. I needed a witness. I needed to be told I could survive this, and I needed people to help me. And that's what brings me here to you today.
Molly, your courage is beyond definition, beyond description. You are on the other side of this now, close to 15 years. You have been blessed with 2 additional children that are thriving because I see them on social media. You have survived. In some ways, you have thrived. People that are listening right now are having all kinds of a range of emotions, right? You are a reluctant parent, kind of like me. Your life goal was not to be a parent. You and I have this sort of soul connection. My goal, my life calling has not ever been to be a parent. I'm told I am blessed. I am blessed with 3 boys. To my wife's horror, I'll have my personality and annoyance and ego and fatigue and all that. I texted my wife recently after I was reading your book, and I said, you will never be the same after you read Molly's book. I made it through the first half. I will make it through the second half. But it's the gift that your book gave to me. Well, first of all, it puts so many of our challenges in perspective. It put the fact that my middle son called my youngest son an effing something this morning, and all hell broke loose, and the youngest one cried, and the oldest one, you get the point, right? It's just, what you would give to have that scenario happen in your house, I can only imagine. I'd like for you to answer the following questions. When you woke up mornings and did not want to live or get out of bed or brush your teeth or vacuum the floor or wash the dishes, how did you make it through that?
First was my parents. They stayed in our home with us for a few weeks. I often describe to people that people who've lost a child are infants. We cannot feed ourselves. We cannot take care of ourselves. So first it was my parents. It was the love of the people in my community. The strange gift was that it was a very public event. There were people there lined up against the church fence. So it became part of their story as well. I did not grieve or suffer in private very much. I did plenty, but it was a community event. So we were all grieving, and therefore so many people reached out. People who had been there themselves in some form or fashion were unafraid to reach out. I had women knock on my door. My one friend, Sherry Swing, knocked on my door and said, "Get on your swimming suit. I'm taking you wakeboarding." Wakeboarding? My daughter just died. She forced me to do it. So it was truly the energy, the love, and the presence of other people that allowed me to go on. It was the only possible way.
Did you have times where you did not think you would survive? You had no other children at the time.
Not only did I not think I would, I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I wanted to run away. I wanted it all to end. And as I began blogging and as I was asked to speak at donor ceremonies and medical schools, and as the news caught wind of me, and then they realized, oh, this woman is articulate. She's a performer. She's not afraid to share. it started to evolve, and that's when I actually landed on something much bigger than just a message for those who have lost a child or those who are grieving, because it was those relationships with other people, the people who fed me for months and who brought flowers and sent me a card every month for a year, even though I'd never met. This was a woman from my husband's law school that he went to law school with. That's when I realized it is these connections with other people that hold the most value. And it's what truly saved my life.
Molly, you are a prolific keynote speaker, and no doubt now that your book has been released, that's going to be a big demand in your life. You've titled your book The Commodity of Connection. An interesting title, right, for talking about connection around this tragedy. You could have written this book without that, but certainly you've been instructed, compelled even, to write this book. What does that mean, the commodity of connection?
First of all, I stole it in some ways from Seth Godin. He was being interviewed on a podcast, and he very casually threw out some thought about how authentic connection is this valuable commodity. And I paused and I wrote that down, and I said, that is the name of my keynote speech. That is the name of my book. That is what holds so much value. And when I saw my husband try to go back to his law firm after burying his only child, I realized there is a profound lack in this country of grief literacy and of humanity and heart in the workplace. And I know we can't live in that space all the time, but once you read the second half of the book, Scott, it will tie in beautifully, and we can talk about that more, but that's where I tie it all together, because I want this to apply to everyone. And although I know next to nothing about actual commodities, I can name what the top traded commodities are in the world. I am not a numbers person. I hate spreadsheets. My brain will shut down. I am a performer and a creative through and through. So it is an interesting title, and I have struggled with it. However, because I want my story, I want Lucy's legacy, I want my message to be received by a broad audience, I wanted, and I didn't have to force it, but I realized that this universal experience of loss, because we're all human, we will all die, we will all lose someone we love, hopefully very few of us will lose children, is applicable to everyone. And oh gosh, I've seen some bad leadership. I have seen some bad leadership. And this heart-centered, emotional, intelligent approach and book, gosh, I can't wait for you to read the second half. It all ties together, and I fought with that title, but ultimately I went with my gut, and luckily that killer subtitle, it brings it all together. So
I hope you don't feel slighted. It's partly your fault.
no, not at all. I
Partly,
understand.
It's so gripping. Partly my lack of not my lack of willpower, my lack of maturity.
Yeah.
Your book is not about grief only. Your book is about authentic relationships. How do you build them? How do you receive them? How do you nurture them, both in your personal and professional life? I don't know how anybody could be unchanged after reading at least the first half of your book. But I do want to ask you a question about trauma and tragedy and grief. I don't know a person who can't benefit right now from learning from you. How do we respond when something tragic happens? Can you just give everybody a short master class on what do we say, what do we do, what do we not do? No one has training in this. Everybody is well-intended. We hear all the time, well, don't say this and don't do that. And then some people say, oh, no, just do anything, but don't do nothing. And people are paralyzed and they don't want to cause more problems. Recognizing that everybody is well-intended, can you give all of us a Molly Bice Jackson masterclass on here's some things to keep in mind? when your intention is to connect, here's
Yes.
what to think about.
Obviously, avoid platitudes, whether you're religious or not. She's in a better place. Just avoid those. Don't be afraid to be honest. I don't know what to say. Wow, this is huge. I don't know if I could handle this, but I'm here for you. I did get a lot of, you're so strong. You're so strong. I could not do what you do. And while it was intended as a compliment, it's a divisive statement. You're strong, you're over there. I'm weak and I'm safe. I would offer rather, I know you have to be so strong, but you're so broken, you're so weak. Please rely on some of my strength. It's better to say something than to say nothing. And it's better to just be honest and say, I don't know what to say. But my favorite tool to create connection, and it applies perfectly with helping those in grief, as well as just helping our fellow humans and being a human, is simply to be a witness. Healing needs a witness. And a witness is simply someone who is not trying to fix or correct or advise. They're just sitting as a powerful witness to your pain. They're not afraid to turn away. They're not afraid to close the book. And there is healing in people just simply being willing to be a witness, just sitting with you. So don't worry too much. Don't let your fear paralyze you into inaction. One of my favorite phrases I advise people to use when they call me, I get calls and messages weekly for years. My neighbor just lost a child. My coworker just lost a child. What do I do? What do I say? And they panic. And the phrase that I always go back to is I say, tell them your child will not be forgotten and your pain will not be forgotten. That's just what people want to hear. They need to know that it won't be forgotten. So.
How are you changed?
Oh.
What do you need everybody to learn from this incomprehensible circumstance that resulted from your daughter's choking death? What do you need? If you could shake humanity and say, listen to me.
Yes, there's a few things. One is a quote from a man named Neil A. Maxwell. The cavity carved by pain can one day become our receptacle for joy. So small moments of being on the ski lift with my children, opening presents Christmas morning, going on a run, seeing a moose in my backyard, those are wonderful for anyone. They're really wonderful for me because that cavity is carved deep. And as you'll read later in my book, some snowboard boys at Park City Mountain Resort, after riding the chairlift with them and me telling them about my story and what I do and who I am, one of them looked at me and said, wow, life really has a way of working out if we're willing to work with it. And I need people who are in grief, who are in a really dark place, to know that their cavity that's being carved can really become a receptacle for joy someday. And that life can work out if you're willing to work with it, because grief is work. It's work. And the more you're willing to speak your unspeakable, to open up to the appropriate people, the more opportunity you'll have for healing, for being seen, for being heard, and for being valued, which is what all of us are craving and needing. So
I'm going to ask you to tell a riotous story in the book about this conference you went to and this person you saw in the front row and their blazer, all of that. For those who think I phoned it in by not reading the book, the reason I actually could not finish the book was because I have been to that church where you were. I've been to with a friend. I know where this firehouse is. like you, I've lived in Park City and I see the life flights go back and forth. There's a fair number of ski incidents and accidents, so it's very common daily in the season to see life flight going back and forth. I've been to the hospital where you've been, and so I think I was so far but kind of close to this in my own residency. It had a very visceral impact on me, naturally, as a father of 3 young boys. I was thinking when I was reading your story how my wife would have reacted, how I would have reacted. I saw much of myself in your husband. I saw much of my wife in you, and we will read your book and finish it because. After the story of your daughter's passing, you do talk about this common denominator. You were at a national speakers conference, and it's a very interesting story you share about a person that you spied. I want you to talk about it.
So I was.
And don't leave out the juicy part about their post, right? I think there was about a post. Read that in.
So the short version is that I immediately bonded with a sassy, fun, cute fellow shorty like me. We were both blonde. I'm like, oh, I get her vibe. I like her. I loved how she smelled. We just were hamming it up and laughing and exchanged contact information before the meeting formally began. Then we went to our separate seats. We sat down and I thought, okay, I've got a new Instagram follower. I got a new friend. And I went to her profile and I did not like what I saw. She was supporting a certain candidate that I'm not a fan of in any way, shape, or form. And my heart sank. And I truly said to myself, did I just bond with and instantly love a so-and-so supporter? Ooh. And then 2 seconds later, I just smiled to myself and I said, I sure did. I sure did. And thank goodness I started with her where I did. I did not meet her first on social media. And I know this is a hard pivot from everything we were just talking about, but it is one of the tools that I teach in my book to create connection, is that there is a common denominator amongst all of us. I don't care if it's just that you both love the same kind of chocolate, or your husbands use the same deodorant, something stupid. There is a common denominator amongst all of us. And when that's what we focus on first, and in my case, the way I go through the world, the common denominator more often than not is simply suffering, that we all are walking through this world with a story. And we all have secrets and pains that no one knows about. But in this case, I loved her blazer. I loved how she smelled. I loved her humor. And that taught me a profound lesson in that moment. And I was actually proud of myself. I'm like, I am friends with this so-and-so supporter that I would have completely dismissed. And it delighted me. And I have always been able to find a way to find that common denominator with anyone. Strangers, it's often fun to do with. And the strongest common denominator that has brought connection for my life now is others who've lost a child, of course. Never do I think, are they worthy of my love and empathy? Who did they vote for? How much money do they make? If someone tells me they lost a child, they are an instant soulmate. I understand them at the deepest level. And it's a skill and a tool that people can learn in my book, maybe not that deeply, nor would they need to that deeply as a leader necessarily, but it all goes back to our shared humanity. And
I hope that our listeners and viewers, hundreds of them, book you for their sales conference, their president's club, their chairman's club, their leadership retreat. I hope you are booked insanely well out of this podcast. When someone does invite you to come speak at their organization, what are they going to get?
Well, they're going to get some levity. You once told me that I was, I think you said, the second funniest person you know. Which I don't know how much that means coming from a nerdy leadership FranklinCovey man, but I will take any compliment I can get in that realm. They will get some levity. I am very aware of the gravity of my story, and I am aware of storytelling, and I offer reprieve. So they're going to actually get some dancing, some laughter, probably some tears. And I've got a workbook that goes along with my book. I actually have two versions. I have more of a corporate workbook that we can work through and help them create more connection on their teams. And then I have more of a personal workbook for for personal lives. And you're going to get presence, you're going to get audience interaction, a bit of riffing, and it's such a great time. I love speaking. I love connecting with the audience afterward. That is such a rich part of my job.
Molly Bice Jackson, your story is kind of beyond description, but your book is very much something that is relevant and beautiful and tender. You've titled your book, The Commodity of Connection, How Authentic Relationships Saved My Life When My Daughter Lost Hers. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott. I loved it.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.